Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right in today because we are looking at one of the absolute most thrilling and perilous moments in history. I want you to imagine this. The young United States has just won a grueling revolutionary war against a global superpower. You'd think it was time to celebrate, right? Well, actually, no. They had won the war, but they were teetering on the very brink of losing the peace. This brand new nation was facing massive existential threats, from crippling debt to incredibly dangerous borders, that honestly could have wiped the United States off the map before it even truly began. Here is our agenda for today, basically the ultimate survival guide for the early United States. We're looking at a young nation in peril, Hamilton's bold financial plan, the Whiskey Rebellion's test, the strategy of neutrality, and finally, morality, wisdom, and education. Let's get started. Section 1. A young nation in peril. Debt, defense, and diplomacy. Back in 1790, the young country was staring down a staggering financial gap. The national debt from the Revolutionary War was sitting at an absolutely sky-high $54 million. And the states? They owed another $25 million on top of that. Meanwhile, the government's revenue was practically non-existent. You can imagine the panic, right? The U.S. began with enormous debts and literally no money to pay its soldiers or its creditors. And this war debt was way more than just a number on a piece of paper. If they couldn't pay, soldiers would feel deeply betrayed, and good luck getting future lenders to give them a dime. This total lack of funds was actively destroying financial trust, both at home and abroad. And, the crisis wasn't just financial, it was territorial. The frontier was incredibly tense. You had British forts still dotting the Northwest Territory around the Great Lakes, just completely ignoring the borders set by the Treaty of Paris. Down south, Spain controlled the Mississippi River and the critical port of New Orleans, which basically put a chokehold on American agricultural trade. And all the while, there were constant, tense conflicts with native nations in the Ohio River Valley that demanded really careful negotiation and defense. So, with powerful neighbors pressing in and frontier tensions boiling over, this new nation was extremely vulnerable to outside forces. The walls were truly closing in. So, how exactly do you survive a situation like that? Well, you definitely don't do it alone. There's a quote from Proverbs 15:22 that really hits the nail on the head here. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. And great leaders like George Washington, they knew this. They knew they couldn't just act on impulse or pride. They leaned heavily on this exact biblical principle of seeking out wise counsel and planning with a lot of self-control before making a single move. Moving on to Section 2, Hamilton's bold financial plan, building a financial reputation. Now, since Washington needed that wise counsel, his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, really stepped up to deliver it. Let's break down his master strategies step by step. First off, through his Assumption Plan of 1790, he wanted the national government to assume all the individual state war debts. Why would he do that? Well, assuming those debts tied the state's financial futures directly to the national government. It built a strong national credit. It's kind of like building a rock-solid modern financial reputation so that lenders actually trust you and lower your future borrowing costs. And to fund this whole thing, his plan implemented tariffs, passed excise taxes, and created a national bank to keep the economic gears turning. The real question is, how did they actually pay the bills for all this? The answer was tariffs. Congress passed a tariff on imported goods known as the Tariff of 1789. Tariffs are actually pretty brilliant because they do two things at once. First, they raise much-needed revenue for the government. Second, they make foreign goods more expensive. This gives domestic American manufacturing a massive protective boost because local goods suddenly become way more competitive. It was just a really smart, stabilizing policy for a super fragile economy. Section 3. The Whiskey Rebellion Test. Liberty versus Order. This brings us to the first major internal test of Hamilton's plan, and man, the two sides were explosively divided. On one side, you've got these angry frontier farmers out in western Pennsylvania. To them, turning their grain into whiskey wasn't just about a drink, it was a vital trade good. It was basically their currency, in a region where actual cash was extremely scarce. So when a new excise tax hit in 1791, they felt their very livelihood was under attack. But on the flip side, the federal government absolutely had to enforce its tax laws to fund the debt plan, and honestly, to prove it had the real authority to govern in the first place. Things escalated, and by 1794, these farmer protests had turned violently dangerous. This sparked the ultimate terrifying question: can this new constitution actually work? Think about it. If citizens can just refuse to accept laws passed by their own representatives, The whole country slides right into anarchy. This fragile young nation was literally threatening to rip apart at the seams, and everyone was watching Washington to see what on earth he was going to do. Well, here is how Washington masterfully responded. He didn't just ignore it, but he didn't turn into a dictator either. Instead, he gathered a massive militia force of nearly 13,000 men from surrounding states. He moved decisively, but really carefully. By mobilizing this overwhelming show of force and then, crucially, stepping down once order was restored, he ended the rebellion with minimal bloodshed. It was a complete game changer. He proved the federal government could maintain order without abusing its power, showing the whole world that liberty and lawful order could peacefully coexist.
Section 4. The strategy of neutrality. Buying time for the nation.
Right as the U.S. was finally finding its footing domestically, massive wars began raging across Europe, sparked by the French Revolution. Washington's response to this chaos? The 1793 Proclamation of Neutrality. Neutrality is simply the policy of not taking sides in conflicts between other nations. Now, there was immense pressure on the U.S. to pick a side here. People wanted them to either support their old revolutionary ally, France, or appease the incredibly powerful British Navy. But Washington, once again, relying on that wise counsel, held his ground. Sticking to neutrality was just a brilliantly calculated strategy. By avoiding these European wars, the United States bought itself the one thing it desperately needed: time. Time to pay off all those massive debts we talked about earlier, time to actually train their small military forces, and time to let the economy grow. If they had gotten dragged into a fight with a major global power right then, it would have absolutely destroyed the fragile country. Neutrality was basically the shield that allowed the nation to grow up. Section 5. Morality, Wisdom, and Education. The Godly Learner's Philosophy. The survival of the United States wasn't just about managing money and militias. It relied deeply on leaders making wise, morally grounded decisions. And this brings us to a really key philosophy from the Heroesmartacademy Godly Learners series, which states quite simply, education without morality will hurt. Really think about that for a second. What is the point of being smart, having a booming economy, and being supposedly educated if you just keep making bad, prideful choices that hurt people? The leaders of the early republic couldn't just rely on raw intelligence. They had to rely on honesty, a respect for lawful order, and a genuine desire for peace. Romans 8:6-7 promises peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. And honestly, this is exactly what we see reflected in this era of history. From a perspective of biblical morality, true national strength isn't built on fear or pride. It's built through wisdom and serving the common good. When you look at Washington's peace of mind during the chaos of the Whiskey Rebellion or those European wars, it clearly came from maintaining a loving, wise, and morally grounded perspective. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty powerful reflection question. How can wise counsel help leaders make decisions that protect both freedom and order? Think about how you might apply the lessons of Washington's seeking advice, Hamilton's careful financial balancing act, and that core moral requirement of education to your own life and your own leadership today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep seeking wisdom, and I'll catch you next time.